The notification from my bank app lit up my phone at exactly 2:43 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. Transaction approved. $847,000. Interior design consultation and immediate implementation. Marcus's face when he checked our joint account that evening was worth every single penny I'd just spent redecorating his precious home office. The same office where he'd screamed at me 3 days earlier for buying a $12 coffee mug. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fight had started over something so ridiculous, I almost laughed, thinking about it now. I'd come home from Target with a few household items. Nothing extravagant, just the usual necessities, plus one small indulgence, a ceramic mug with a motivational quote that had made me smile in the store. $17 total for the mug, including tax. Marcus had been sitting at our kitchen island, laptop open, wearing that stern expression he reserved for reviewing quarterly reports at his consulting firm. When I unpacked my purchases, he held up the receipt like it was evidence in a criminal trial. "Sophia, we need to talk about your spending habits," he'd said, his voice carrying that condescending tone I'd grown to despise over our 8 years of marriage. "This mug cost $17. That's completely unnecessary when we have perfectly functional mugs in the cabinet." I had stared at him, waiting for the punchline that never came. This was the same man who'd spent $3,000 the previous month on a new set of golf clubs without mentioning it to me. The same man who regularly dropped hundreds on business dinners and justified it as networking. The same man who'd recently purchased a luxury watch worth more than some people's monthly salary. "It's just a mug, Marcus," I'd replied, keeping my voice level despite the familiar surge of frustration. I liked the quote on it. "It's not about the mug," he'd continued, closing his laptop with deliberate precision. "It's about mindful spending. Every dollar matters when we're trying to build our future together. These little impulse purchases add up. Our future together." The phrase stung because I'd been hearing it for years, always in the context of why I needed to sacrifice something I wanted. Delay the master's degree I'd been planning because the tuition was too expensive right now. Skip the vacation to visit my sister in California because we needed to focus on savings. Postpone starting the family I desperately wanted because we weren't financially ready. Meanwhile, Marcus's definition of mindful spending seemed to apply only to my purchases. His expensive hobbies, his designer suits, his top-shelf bourbon collection, those were investments in his professional image and personal well-being. My $17 mug was frivolous waste. "You're right," I'd said finally, picking up the offending mug and examining it. "Every dollar does matter. I'll try to be more mindful." The conversation had ended there, but something had shifted in me. Maybe it was the way he'd smiled with satisfaction at my apparent compliance. Maybe it was the realization that this pattern had been building for years, with me consistently making smaller and smaller concessions while his lifestyle remained unchanged. Or maybe it was simply that I'd reached the limit of how much condescension I could swallow. That night, after Marcus fell asleep, I sat in our living room with my laptop and began doing something I hadn't done in months, reviewing our complete financial picture. Not just the household budget that Marcus managed and occasionally criticized me for exceeding, but everything. Our joint accounts, our individual retirement funds, the investment portfolio, even the business accounts for his consulting firm that I'd helped him establish 5 years earlier. What I discovered made the $17 mug incident seem even more absurd. Over the past 6 months, while Marcus had been lecturing me about fiscal responsibility, he'd been spending money like someone who'd won the lottery. A $2,000 weekend getaway to Napa Valley that he'd claimed was a business retreat but involved no other colleagues. Monthly charges to an exclusive men's club downtown that cost more than our grocery budget. Regular purchases from high-end clothing stores and electronics retailers that never seemed to result in items appearing in our home. The most puzzling discovery was a series of recurring payments to something called Prestige Property Management, $1,500 monthly going back 8 months. When I searched the company name, I found they specialized in luxury short-term rentals and executive housing, the kind of service someone might use if they were maintaining a second residence. I closed the laptop and stared across our perfectly appointed living room. decorated in the neutral tones Marcus preferred because they were timeless and wouldn't require updating. Everything in our house was chosen for its practicality and long-term value. Nothing was selected simply because it brought joy or beauty into our daily lives. Even the artwork on our walls had been purchased because Marcus read that original art was a sound investment, not because either of us particularly loved the pieces. For 8 years, I'd molded myself into Marcus's vision of the ideal partner. I'd taken a job at his friend's accounting firm because it offered stability and complemented his career goals, even though I'd originally dreamed of starting my own business. I'd agreed to live in the suburban house he'd chosen because it was in an up-and-coming neighborhood with good resale potential, even though I'd wanted something closer to the city with more character. I had worn my hair in the conservative style he preferred, and built a wardrobe of classic pieces that would never go out of style but also never made me feel particularly beautiful or confident. The woman who'd once been excited about taking risks and pursuing unconventional paths had gradually disappeared, replaced by someone who apologized for buying a mug that cost less than Marcus spent on a single lunch. The next morning, Marcus left early for what he said was a client meeting across town. After his car disappeared around the corner, I drove to the address I'd found for Prestige Property Management. The office was located in a gleaming downtown high-rise, all marble and glass, and exactly the kind of impressive space that would appeal to Marcus's sense of status. The receptionist was polished and professional, her smile warm but carefully neutral when I introduced myself as Mrs. Marcus Thompson and explained that I needed to review the account details for our rental property. "Of course, Mrs. Thompson," she said, pulling up information on her computer. "Mr. Thompson's executive suite has been one of our most popular units. The penthouse level with the city view is always in high demand." Executive suite. Penthouse level. The words hit me like physical blows. "I'm sorry," I managed. "Could you refresh my memory about the specific unit details? I've been so busy lately that the specifics are a bit fuzzy." She turned her monitor slightly so I could see the screen. The listing showed a luxurious one-bedroom apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, a modern kitchen with high-end appliances, and a bathroom that looked like it belonged in a 5-star hotel. The monthly rental cost was exactly what I'd seen on our bank statements. "The lease runs through the end of next year," the receptionist continued helpfully. "Mr. Thompson mentioned that he uses it primarily for late client meetings and when he needs to stay downtown for early morning appointments. Such a practical arrangement for busy professionals." I thanked her and left the building in a daze. Marcus had been maintaining a secret apartment for 8 months. While lecturing me about the cost of a $17 mug, he'd been spending nearly $2,000 monthly on what was essentially a luxury hotel room that he used whenever it was convenient. The discovery felt like a betrayal, but it was more than that. It was confirmation of something I'd suspected but never admitted to myself, that Marcus viewed our marriage as a hierarchy where his needs and desires took priority over mine, where his definition of reasonable expenses was the only one that mattered. Driving home, I passed the Target where I'd bought the mug that had triggered our latest fight about money. On impulse, I pulled into the parking lot and went inside. I walked slowly through the home goods section, looking at all the small things that might bring a moment of happiness to someone's day. Colorful throw pillows, scented candles, decorative picture frames, cheerful kitchen towels. I thought about the years I'd spent walking past these items, mentally calculating whether Marcus would consider them necessary purchases. How many times had I talked myself out of buying something simply because I knew it would result in a conversation about our financial priorities? Standing in that aisle, surrounded by affordable items that could transform a house into a home, I realized that the issue had never really been about money. It had been about control. About maintaining a dynamic where Marcus got to decide what constituted reasonable spending, where my preferences were automatically categorized as frivolous, unless they aligned with his practical sensibilities. I bought 6 items that day, none of them strictly necessary. A set of colorful dish towels, a candle that smelled like vanilla and sandalwood, a small succulent in a bright blue pot, a throw pillow with an abstract pattern in shades of coral and gold, a picture frame with an inspirational quote, and yes, another mug. This one with a rainbow design that made me smile. The total came to $63.47. More than Marcus typically spent on lunch, less than he'd spend on a bottle of wine when we went out to dinner. When I got home, I arranged my purchases throughout our house. The colorful towels in the kitchen, the candle on the coffee table, the succulent on the windowsill, where it would get morning light. Each item was a small act of rebellion, a quiet declaration that my preferences mattered too. That evening, when Marcus returned from his supposed client meeting, he noticed the changes immediately. His eyes moved from item to item, and I could see him mentally calculating the cost. "You went shopping again today," he observed, setting down his briefcase in the precise location where he always placed it. "I did," I replied, not offering any justification or apology. "I bought a few things that made me happy." He picked up the receipt I'd left on the kitchen counter, studying it with the same intensity he'd shown the mug receipt days earlier. $63, Sophia. We just talked about this. Yes, we did talk about it, I agreed. You explained that every dollar matters when we're building our future together, that mindful spending is important. Something in my tone must have caught his attention because he looked up from the receipt with a slightly puzzled expression. "I'm glad we agree," he said carefully. "Oh, we absolutely agree," I continued, moving to the kitchen to start dinner. "In fact, your words really resonated with me. So much so that I've been thinking a lot about our spending habits lately. Both of ours." I could feel him watching me as I pulled ingredients from the refrigerator, but I kept my voice light and conversational. "I've been wondering about your perspective on some of our other expenses, like that prestige property management charge that shows up every month." I was curious about what that covers. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming and the distant sound of our neighbor's dog barking. When I turned around, Marcus was standing frozen by the counter, the receipt still in his hand, his face pale. "I can explain that," he said slowly. "I'm sure you can," I replied. "I'd love to hear about this mindful spending decision you made. 8 months ago, if I'm reading the statements correctly. For the first time in our 8-year marriage, I watched Marcus struggle for words. The man who built his career on confident presentations and persuasive arguments was speechless. "It's not what you think," he finally managed. "I don't think anything yet," I said, keeping my voice pleasant. "I'm just curious about the expense. $1,500 a month is significant. That's what, about 88 coffee mugs per month? I want to understand how this fits into our careful financial planning." Marcus set down the receipt and ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I'd rarely seen from him. "It's a business expense," he said. "The firm sometimes needs a downtown location for client meetings, late meetings, early presentations. It's more professional than a hotel." "A business expense," I repeated. "That's charged to our personal account?" "It's temporary," he said quickly. "Just until the firm's cash flow improves. I'll expense it back." I nodded thoughtfully, turning back to the vegetables I was chopping for dinner. "That makes sense," I said. "A professional space downtown would definitely be valuable for your business. I imagine it's quite nice for $1,500 a month." "It's adequate," Marcus replied, some of his confidence returning now that I seemed to be accepting his explanation. "I'm sure it is. You've always had excellent taste when it comes to professional presentation." We finished dinner preparation in relative quiet, but I could feel the tension radiating from Marcus. He'd answered my questions, but he clearly wasn't convinced that the conversation was over. He was right to be concerned. That night, after Marcus went to bed, I returned to my laptop and began researching in earnest. Not just our financial records this time, but Marcus himself. His social media accounts, his professional networking profiles, recent photos tagged by colleagues and friends. Most revealing were the posts from his business partner's wife, who apparently considered Marcus's downtown entertaining an extension of their social circle. The pictures told a story that Marcus's business expense explanation couldn't account for. Photos from the apartment's rooftop terrace during weekend gatherings. Marcus mixing cocktails in what was clearly a residential kitchen, not a conference room. Images of him and various colleagues relaxing in what looked like a living room, not a professional meeting space. But the most damning evidence came from a photo posted 3 weeks earlier. Marcus at what appeared to be a dinner party in the apartment, standing next to a woman I didn't recognize. They weren't touching, but their body language suggested a familiarity that went beyond professional networking. She was young, probably in her late 20s, with the kind of effortless style that came from having both money and time to cultivate it. The caption, posted by someone named Jennifer, who seemed to be the hostess, read, "Another fabulous evening at Marcus's downtown place. Nothing like good friends, great wine, and a view of the city to make the week worthwhile. Marcus's downtown place. Not the firm's professional space. His place." I screenshot everything, saving the images to a folder on my personal cloud storage. Then I began planning what would become the most expensive day of my marriage. The next morning was Saturday, and Marcus announced that he needed to go into the office for a few hours to catch up on paperwork. This had become a regular weekend occurrence over the past few months, and I now understood why. His Saturday office hours were likely spent at his downtown apartment, possibly entertaining the woman from the photos, or simply enjoying the luxury of a space that was entirely his own. "Take your time," I told him as he gathered his things. "I have some errands to run anyway." After his car disappeared, I got dressed with more care than I'd taken in months. Not the practical business casual that had become my uniform, but a flowing dress in deep emerald green that I'd bought 2 years ago and barely worn because Marcus had commented that it was a bit much for everyday wear. I added jewelry that actually sparkled, shoes with heels high enough to make a statement, and makeup that was designed to be noticed rather than merely presentable. My first stop was the bank. I'd called ahead and scheduled a meeting with the personal banker who managed our accounts, explaining that I needed to discuss some changes to our financial arrangements. "Mrs. Thompson," greeted David Chen, the banker who'd worked with us for 5 years. "It's wonderful to see you. You mentioned wanting to discuss account modifications?" "Yes," I said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "I need to understand our account structures and my access levels. Specifically, I want to know about the accounts that my husband uses for business expenses." David pulled up our information on his computer, reviewing the various accounts linked to our names. "You have joint access to the primary checking and savings accounts," he explained. "There's also the business account for Mr. Thompson's consulting firm, which is in his name only but shows you as an authorized user with full access rights." My first purchase was strategic rather than emotional. I authorized a payment of $12,000 to Crown Luxury Automotive for what I described to David as a necessary business vehicle upgrade. Marcus had been driving a 3-year-old sedan that was perfectly functional but hardly impressive for client meetings. A successful consultant needed reliable transportation that reflected his professional status. The BMW I selected was sleek, powerful, and exactly the kind of statement piece that Marcus would have purchased himself if he'd been honest about our financial situation. When the dealership called to confirm delivery details, I arranged for them to bring the car directly to our house at 4 o'clock that afternoon, precisely when Marcus typically returned from his Saturday office sessions. Next came the home office renovation. Marcus's current workspace was adequate, but uninspiring, furnished with pieces we'd bought 8 years ago when we first moved into the house. A successful consulting firm required a more professional environment for video conferences and client presentations. I called Premier Design Solutions, the interior design firm that had been featured in last month's issue of Metropolitan Home. When I explained that I needed a complete office transformation completed within the week, the designer nearly vibrated with excitement over the phone. "Budget considerations?" asked Miranda, the lead designer. "None," I replied, a phrase that felt foreign and delicious on my tongue. "This is an investment in my husband's professional image. I want something that will make every client feel like they're working with the most successful consultant in the city." "I have the perfect vision," Miranda gushed. "Custom built-ins, imported marble surfaces, professional lighting design, top-of-the-line audio-visual equipment. We're talking about creating a space that rivals the best corporate boardrooms." "Perfect. When can you start?" "We could have measurements done this afternoon and begin installation Monday morning. For a project of this scope, with premium materials and expedited timeline, we're looking at approximately $850,000. I paused, not because the amount shocked me, but because I wanted to savor the moment. Marcus's business account could easily handle the expense, and after months of having my own spending scrutinized and questioned, the freedom to authorize such a purchase felt intoxicating. "Let's do it," I said. "I'll meet you at the house in 2 hours." David completed the transfer paperwork with professional efficiency, though I caught him glancing at the amounts with barely concealed amazement. In less than an hour, I had authorized purchases totaling nearly $900,000, more money than Marcus had allowed me to spend on personal items in our entire 8 years of marriage. "Will Mr. Thompson need to be notified of these transactions?" David asked as I prepared to leave. "Oh, he'll find out soon enough," I assured him. "But please don't feel obligated to call him. I'll handle that conversation personally." My next stop was Nordstrom, where I had an appointment with a personal shopper. I'd called ahead and explained that I needed a complete wardrobe refresh for someone whose lifestyle was evolving rapidly. When I arrived, Patricia, an elegant woman in her 50s, had already pulled selections from every department. "I took the liberty of choosing pieces that would work for various situations," she explained, leading me through racks of designer clothing. Professional wear that commands respect, social attire for networking events, and some pieces that are simply beautiful because every woman deserves to feel stunning. For 2 hours, I tried on clothing that actually fit my personality instead of Marcus's conservative preferences. Bold colors that complemented my skin tone, silhouettes that flattered my figure, fabrics that felt luxurious against my skin. Each outfit made me feel more like the woman I'd been before I'd gradually molded myself into Marcus's ideal partner. The final tally was $18,000, not including the shoes, accessories, and handbags that Patricia insisted were essential for completing each look. When I handed over the credit card linked to Marcus's business account, I felt a rush of satisfaction that had nothing to do with the beautiful clothing and everything to do with reclaiming my right to make choices about my own appearance. "Should we arrange delivery?" Patricia asked. "No need," I said, gathering the shopping bags. "I'll be wearing most of these immediately." I changed into one of my new outfits before leaving the store, a sophisticated navy dress with subtle silver threading that caught the light when I moved. The transformation was remarkable. The woman looking back at me from the dressing room mirror stood straighter, smiled more confidently, and looked like someone who expected to be taken seriously. My reflection reminded me of who I'd been in college, before I'd started dimming my own light to avoid outshining Marcus's. That woman had been planning to start her own accounting firm, had dreamed of traveling to places that existed beyond practical budget considerations, had believed that marriage should be a partnership between equals rather than a hierarchy with predetermined roles. Walking through the mall in my new dress, I felt like I was reclaiming pieces of myself that I'd gradually surrendered over the years. Each confident step was a small rebellion against the woman I'd become, the one who apologized for wanting things and justified her smallest desires in terms of their practical value. By the time I arrived home, Miranda and her design team were already taking measurements and creating detailed plans for the office renovation. They moved through the space with professional precision, discussing concepts like floating shelves made from reclaimed walnut and a conference table carved from a single piece of Brazilian rosewood. "The lighting will be the key element," Miranda explained, gesturing toward the windows. "We'll install smart glass that can transition from transparent to opaque for privacy during video conferences. The built-in displays will be seamlessly integrated, so they appear invisible when not in use." I nodded along, occasionally offering input, but mostly enjoying the experience of making decisions without having to justify every choice to someone else. When they discussed the imported marble for the accent wall, I didn't calculate the cost or worry about whether it was too extravagant. When they suggested custom millwork for the storage solutions, I didn't question whether we really needed built-in organization systems. For the first time in years, I was making choices based on what would create the most beautiful and functional result, not on what would pass Marcus's test of practical necessity. The design team was still working when I heard Marcus's car in the driveway. I glanced at the clock and realized he was returning earlier than usual, probably because he'd seen the new BMW parked where his sedan normally sat. I positioned myself in the living room, where I could see both the front door and his reaction to the car. When Marcus walked through the door, his expression was a fascinating mixture of confusion and concern. Sophia, he called, his voice carefully controlled. There's a BMW in our driveway. I know, I replied, looking up from the magazine I'd been pretending to read. It's yours. Congratulations on your new company car. Marcus appeared in the living room doorway, still holding his keys, studying my face for signs that this was some kind of joke. My new company car, he repeated slowly. Your current car is 3 years old, I explained reasonably. Hardly the image you want to project when meeting with high-level clients. I thought it was time for an upgrade that better reflects your professional success. You bought me a car, he said, as if testing how the words sounded. The business bought you a car, I corrected. It's a legitimate expense for a consulting firm. Much more defensible than some other business expenses I could mention. Something flickered across his face at that comment, but before he could respond, Miranda appeared from the hallway. Mrs. Thompson, she said brightly, we've finished the initial assessment. The demolition crew will arrive Monday morning at 7, and we should have the space completely transformed by Friday evening. Your husband is going to have the most impressive office in the city. Marcus stared at Miranda, then at me, then back at Miranda. Demolition crew? He asked weakly. For the office renovation, I explained. Miranda is redesigning your entire workspace. Top of the line everything, custom built-ins, the works. You'll be able to host client meetings here that rival any downtown corporate office. How much is this office renovation going to cost? Marcus asked, though I could tell from his tone that he was afraid of the answer. About $850,000, Miranda answered cheerfully. But that includes everything from the custom millwork to the imported materials. It's really quite reasonable for a project of this scope. Marcus sat down heavily on our sofa, his face pale. I watched him process the numbers, probably calculating how much of his business account balance I'd just spent in a single afternoon. $850,000, he repeated. Plus the car, I added helpfully. But these are investments in your professional image. Exactly the kind of mindful spending you've been talking about. Miranda, blissfully unaware of the tension in the room, continued discussing the renovation timeline and design elements. She was particularly excited about the conference table, which would be equipped with hidden technology ports and wireless charging capabilities. The entire space will be voice-activated, she explained. Lighting, temperature, audio-visual systems, even the window opacity can be controlled verbally. It's like having a personal assistant built into the room itself. I nodded enthusiastically while watching Marcus struggle to maintain his composure. The man who had lectured me about $17 mugs was now faced with expenses that exceeded his monthly income by factors he'd probably never considered. After Miranda and her team left, Marcus and I sat in silence for several minutes. He kept glancing toward the window where his new BMW was visible in the driveway, then looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. We need to talk, he finally said. Of course, I agreed. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's purchases. I tried to make decisions that aligned with your philosophy about mindful spending and building our future together. Sophia, you spent almost $1 million today. The business spent almost $1 million today, I corrected. On legitimate business expenses that will enhance your professional reputation and provide appropriate settings for client interactions. Isn't that exactly the kind of strategic thinking you've been encouraging? Marcus rubbed his temples, a gesture I recognized from his most stressful days at work. You had no right to spend that money without discussing it with me first. Discussing it with you, I repeated thoughtfully. The way you discussed the Prestige property management payments with me before authorizing them? The silence that followed confirmed that Marcus understood exactly what I was referencing. His secret apartment was no longer secret, and his attempts to control our spending while maintaining his own luxury lifestyle had been exposed. That's different, he said eventually. How is it different? It's my business account. I earned that money. With my help, I replied calmly. I've been managing your books, organizing your client files, and supporting your career for 8 years. That business exists because I sacrificed my own professional goals to help you build it. I'd say I've earned some input into how the profits are spent. Marcus stood up and began pacing, another stress response I'd learned to recognize over the years. You can't just make unilateral decisions about major purchases, he said. That's not how marriages work. You're absolutely right, I agreed. Marriages should involve consultation and mutual respect when it comes to financial decisions. Both partners should have equal say in how money is spent. Neither person should be lectured about the cost of small personal purchases, while the other maintains secret expensive commitments. He stopped pacing and looked at me directly. What do you want, Sophia? I want honesty, I said. I want transparency about our finances. I want to be treated like an equal partner instead of a child who needs permission to buy a coffee mug. And if I agree to that, you'll stop this spending spree? I smiled, realizing that Marcus still didn't understand the situation he was in. Oh, I'm not done spending, I said. I've barely gotten started. Today was just a warm-up. The color drained from his face. What do you mean? I mean that I've spent 8 years watching you make financial decisions without consulting me. I've accepted your explanations about why my desires were impractical, while you indulged your own preferences without question. I've been the model of financial restraint, while you maintained a lifestyle that contradicts everything you've preached to me about responsible spending. I stood up and smoothed my new dress, enjoying the feel of fabric that actually suited my taste. Now it's my turn to make some unilateral financial decisions. Consider it a learning experience. Sophia, be reasonable. You can't spend all of our money just to make a point. I'm not spending all of our money, I clarified. I'm spending your money. The money you've been hiding in business accounts while imposing artificial scarcity on our household budget. The money you've been using to fund a lifestyle that you apparently believed I didn't deserve to share. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. For perhaps the first time in our marriage, he was completely without words. I'm going out for dinner, I announced, picking up my new handbag. Don't wait up. I have several more purchases to research, and I want to properly appreciate this new dress. As I walked toward the door, Marcus found his voice. Where are you going? To enjoy the fruits of our joint labor, I replied. Something I should have been doing all along. The restaurant I chose was Le Bernardin, the kind of establishment where Marcus and I had never dined together because he considered it an unnecessary expense. The maitre d' seemed delighted to accommodate a last-minute reservation when I mentioned that cost was no object. Sitting alone at a table with a perfect view of the city lights, I ordered wine that cost more per bottle than my usual weekly grocery budget. Each sip tasted like freedom. The meal was extraordinary, but more than that, it was mine. Chosen by me, paid for without justification, enjoyed without having to consider whether someone else would approve of my choices. While I ate, I researched my next day's purchases on my phone. A spa weekend at the luxury resort 2 hours away that Marcus had always deemed too expensive. A consultation with the travel agent who specialized in custom European itineraries. An appointment with the real estate agent who handled the most exclusive properties in the city. If Marcus wanted to see what real spending looked like, I was happy to provide a comprehensive demonstration. By the time I returned home, the house was dark except for the light in Marcus's study. I could see him through the window, hunched over his laptop, probably reviewing account balances, and trying to calculate how much damage I could do to his carefully hoarded finances. I climbed the stairs quietly, not wanting to interrupt his calculations. He would need to understand the full scope of the situation before we had our next conversation. The woman who had apologized for buying a $17 mug was gone, replaced by someone who had finally recognized her own worth and was prepared to demand it be acknowledged. In our bedroom, I hung my new clothes carefully in the closet, arranging them beside the conservative pieces that had comprised my wardrobe for years. The contrast was stark, like looking at artifacts from two different women's lives. Tomorrow would bring new purchases, each one carefully selected to demonstrate what Marcus's philosophy of mindful spending looked like when applied to someone who had actually earned the right to financial freedom. I'd spent 8 years building his success while accepting artificial limitations on my own life. It was time to collect the compensation I'd never been offered but had certainly earned. The sound of Marcus's footsteps on the stairs told me he'd finished his financial review. When he appeared in the bedroom doorway, his expression was grim but controlled. I canceled the credit cards, he announced. All of them? I asked, continuing to organize my new purchases. The ones connected to the business account. You can't continue this destruction. I turned to face him, noting the satisfaction in his voice. Marcus believed he'd regained control of the situation, that cutting off my access to funds would force me back into compliance with his financial authority. That's unfortunate, I said. I was hoping we could handle this like adults. Handle what like adults? You spent almost $1 million in one day to make some kind of point about a coffee mug. That's not adult behavior, Sophia. You're right, I agreed. Let me show you what adult behavior looks like. I walked to the dresser and pulled out a folder I'd prepared earlier that day. Inside were printed copies of every suspicious transaction from our accounts over the past year, photographs from social media showing Marcus's secret lifestyle, and contact information for every business partner and client who might be interested in understanding how their consulting fees were being spent. These are copies, I explained, handing him the folder. The originals are in a very safe place. Marcus opened the folder and began scanning the documents, his face growing progressively paler. You've been spying on me, he said. I've been paying attention, I corrected. Something I should have been doing much earlier in our marriage. What do you want? He asked, the question carrying a different weight than when he'd posed it earlier. I want you to restore my access to all accounts, I said. I want full transparency about our financial situation. And I want you to understand that any attempt to control my spending while maintaining your own luxury lifestyle will result in these documents being shared with some very interested parties. Marcus closed the folder and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger or frustration, but something approaching respect. You planned this, he said. I learned from the best, I replied. 8 years of watching you manipulate financial information to serve your purposes has been quite educational. We stood there for several moments, the balance of power in our marriage shifting so dramatically I could almost feel it in the air between us. If I restore your access, Marcus said slowly, what guarantee do I have that you won't bankrupt us both? The same guarantee I've had for 8 years that you wouldn't secretly spend our money on luxury apartments and expensive entertainment while lecturing me about fiscal responsibility, I replied. None whatsoever. Marcus sat down on the edge of the bed, the folder still in his hands. We can't continue like this, he said. No, I agreed. We can't. The question is, what comes next? What do you propose? Tomorrow, we're going to have a very honest conversation about our marriage, our finances, and our future. We're going to discuss what a real partnership looks like when both people are treated as equals. And we're going to decide whether we can build something honest together, or whether it's time to admit that we want fundamentally different things. I walked to the closet and selected one of my new outfits for the following day. A confident red dress that would have been too bold for the old Sophia but felt perfect for the woman I was becoming. Until then, I continued, I suggest you think carefully about whether you want a wife or an employee. Because I'm no longer available for the employee position. Marcus didn't respond, but I could see him processing the ultimatum. The comfortable dynamic where he made the decisions and I provided the support was over. What replaced it would depend on whether he was capable of seeing me as an equal partner, or whether he was too invested in maintaining control to accept a genuine partnership. As I prepared for bed, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the one who had apologized for buying a coffee mug just days earlier. This woman looked like someone who expected to be heard, respected, and valued. For the first time in years, I was proud of my reflection. The real conversation would come tomorrow. But tonight I fell asleep, knowing that regardless of what Marcus decided, I had already reclaimed the most important thing he'd taken from me, my sense of my own worth. The rest was just money. I woke before dawn, not from anxiety but from excitement. For the first time in years, I was eager to see what the day would bring instead of dreading another round of walking on eggshells around Marcus's moods and expectations. The red dress I'd selected the night before hung on the closet door like a banner of independence, and when I put it on, I felt like I was putting on armor. Marcus was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, standing at the coffee machine with his back to me. His posture was rigid, and I could tell from the set of his shoulders that he'd spent most of the night thinking about our conversation. Good. He needed to understand that his comfortable world of unquestioned authority was over. "Coffee?" he asked without turning around, his voice carefully neutral. "Please," I replied, settling at the kitchen island where this entire confrontation had begun, with a $17 mug. He poured 2 cups and set one in front of me, then sat across the island like we were negotiating a business deal rather than trying to save our marriage. In many ways, I supposed we were. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," he began. "And?" "I restored your access to all the accounts." I pulled out my phone and checked the banking app. Sure enough, all restrictions had been lifted. Marcus had kept his word, at least about this first step. "Thank you," I said. "That's a good start." I also transferred the apartment lease into the business name officially. You were right that it was inappropriate to charge personal convenience to our household accounts. I waited, sensing there was more. "But I need you to understand something, Sophia. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Marcus stopped pacing and stared at me. "What do you want me to do, Sophia? Apologize for being successful? Feel guilty for earning more money than we spend on groceries?" "I want you to be honest," I said. "About our finances, about your spending, about what you really think this marriage should look like." "Fine. You want honesty? Here's honesty. I've been supporting both of us for 8 years. Every dollar you spent yesterday came from work I did, clients I impressed, deals I negotiated. You've been living off my success while contributing filing and bookkeeping that I could hire an assistant to do for a fraction of what your spending spree cost me." The words hung in the air between us like a physical barrier. Marcus had finally said what I'd suspected he'd been thinking for years, that my contributions were minimal and easily replaceable, that I was essentially an expensive employee rather than a partner. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For what?" "For finally being honest about how you see me." Marcus seemed to realize that his outburst had revealed more than he'd intended. "Sophia, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I interrupted. "You meant every word, and it clarifies things considerably." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the BMW sitting in our driveway. Yesterday it had represented a gesture of partnership, a wife investing in her husband's success. Now I understood it differently. It was a symbol of my declaration of independence, the first purchase in what would become my exit strategy. "You're right that I've been living off your success," I said, still looking out the window. "But you've also been living off my support. The question is whether we can find a way to value both contributions equally, or whether we're too far apart in our fundamental beliefs about partnership." "What does that mean?" I turned back to face him. "It means I'm going to continue spending money, Marcus. Not to destroy anything, but to invest in myself, to reclaim the dreams I postponed and the opportunities I sacrificed. You can see that as financial terrorism, or you can see it as long overdue compensation for 8 years of undervalued labor. How much money are we talking about?" "Enough to matter." Marcus sat back down, his face pale. "Sophia, please, we can work this out. We can discuss changing how we handle finances, maybe give you a larger allowance." "An allowance," I repeated, noting how quickly he'd reverted to thinking of me as dependent on his generosity rather than entitled to equal access to wealth I'd helped create. Poor choice of words. "I meant we could restructure our budget to give you more discretionary spending." "That's very generous of you," I said, "but I'm afraid it's too late for budget restructuring." I walked to the front door and picked up my new handbag, checking to make sure my phone and credit cards were inside. "Where are you going?" "Shopping," I replied. "I have appointments with a travel agent, a real estate broker, and a financial advisor. Then I'm treating myself to lunch somewhere ridiculously expensive." "Sophia, we agreed to have an honest conversation about our marriage." "We did have an honest conversation," I said. "You told me exactly what you think my contributions are worth, and I heard you clearly. Now I'm going to make some decisions based on that information." I opened the front door, then paused. "Oh, and Marcus, you might want to call your business partners and give them a heads up about some large expenditures coming through the accounts. I wouldn't want them to be surprised when they review the monthly statements." The look of panic that crossed his face told me he understood the implications. His business partners had no idea he'd been using company funds for personal luxuries, and they definitely didn't know about the apartment or his entertainment expenses. If they started asking questions about his spending patterns, his carefully constructed professional image would crumble. Sophia, wait. Let's talk about this reasonably. I tried reasonable for 8 years, I replied. Today I'm trying effective. The travel agency was located in the most upscale part of downtown, the kind of place that specialized in creating experiences rather than simply booking trips. When I explained to Clarissa, the senior travel consultant, that I wanted to plan an extended European tour with no budget constraints, her eyes lit up with professional excitement. How extended are we talking about? She asked, pulling up planning software on her computer. 6 months, possibly longer. I want to see everything I've been postponing for years. Start with Paris, then work through Italy, Greece. Maybe spend some time in the countryside writing and painting. Writing and painting? Hobbies I used to have before I got married? I'm thinking of reviving them. Clarissa nodded knowingly. The expression of someone who'd helped other women rediscover themselves after major life transitions. When would you like to depart? As soon as possible. Next week, if we can arrange it. We can absolutely arrange it. First-class accommodations throughout, I assume? The best of everything, I confirmed. This is a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I want it to be perfect. For 2 hours, we planned an itinerary that would have seemed impossible to me just days earlier. Private art lessons in Florence, cooking classes in Tuscany, a month-long writer's retreat in the French countryside, guided tours of archaeological sites in Greece. Each experience was expensive and entirely focused on my own interests and desires. The total cost was staggering, more than Marcus and I had ever spent on a vacation together. More than we'd spent on all our vacations combined over 8 years of marriage. When Clarissa presented the final numbers, I felt a moment of vertigo at the audacity of what I was authorizing. Then I remembered Marcus's words about my contributions being replaceable by an assistant, and I signed the authorization without hesitation. This is going to be the trip of a lifetime, Clarissa assured me as she processed the payment. I'm actually jealous. 6 months of pure self-indulgence in some of the most beautiful places on earth. I'm looking forward to it, I said, and realized I meant it more than I'd meant anything in years. My next appointment was with Rebecca Chen, a real estate agent who specialized in luxury properties for high-net-worth individuals. I'd found her through a recommendation from the travel agency, where Clarissa had mentioned that many of her clients invested in European properties during extended stays. I'm interested in purchasing a small apartment or villa somewhere in Europe, I explained when we met at her office. Something I could use as a base during extended travel, but also as a potential investment property. Rebecca spread brochures across her desk showing properties in Paris, Tuscany, and the Greek islands. Are you looking for something you could rent out when you're not using it, or more of a private retreat? Private retreat, I said immediately. I want a space that's entirely mine, where I can write and paint and think without any external pressures or expectations. I have the perfect property, she said, pulling up listing photos on her laptop. It's a restored farmhouse in Provence, about an hour from Avignon. 3 bedrooms, artist studio, incredible views of the countryside. The owner is a painter who's relocating to the United States and wants to sell to someone who'll appreciate the creative space. The photos showed exactly what I'd been imagining without realizing it. Stone walls, exposed beams, large windows that would flood the studio with perfect light, a garden where I could grow herbs and vegetables, a terrace where I could drink coffee while watching the sunrise over the vineyards. How much? I asked. 450,000 euros. It includes all the furnishings and the studio equipment. I calculated the exchange rate in my head. Almost $500,000 for a house that represented complete independence. A place where I could rediscover who I was without Marcus's expectations and limitations. I'll take it, I said. Rebecca blinked, clearly not expecting such a quick decision. Don't you want to see it first? We could arrange a virtual tour, or you could visit during your upcoming trip to Europe. I trust your judgment, I said, and I trust my instincts. This feels right. We'll need to arrange financing, inspections, legal review. No financing, I interrupted. I'll pay cash. Now Rebecca looked genuinely stunned. Cash purchase of an international property is certainly possible, but it requires some additional legal steps to ensure everything is properly documented. Whatever needs to be done, let's do it. I want to own this property before I leave for Europe next week. By the time I left Rebecca's office, I'd authorized the purchase of a house in France and begun the process of becoming an international property owner. The paperwork would take several days to complete, but the deposit had been transferred from Marcus's business account to an escrow service that specialized in overseas real estate transactions. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. "Please call me. We need to discuss this situation like adults." I deleted the message without responding. We'd had our adult conversation that morning, and Marcus had made his position clear. Now I was making mine equally clear through actions rather than words. My final appointment of the day was with Jonathan Wells, a financial advisor who specialized in helping individuals navigate major life transitions. His office was elegant but comfortable, designed to put clients at ease during what were often difficult conversations about money and the future. "I understand you're considering some significant financial changes," he said after I'd outlined my situation in general terms. "I'm considering divorce," I said directly. "But first, I want to understand what I'm entitled to and how to protect myself financially." Jonathan nodded, pulling out a legal pad to take notes. "How long have you been married?" 8 years. I gave up my career to support my husband's business development. I've contributed to his success through administrative work, client entertainment, and general business support, but most of our assets are held in his name or in business accounts. Do you have documentation of your contributions to the business? Extensive documentation. I maintained all the financial records, client files, and administrative systems from the beginning. I can demonstrate exactly how my work contributed to the firm's growth and profitability. That's excellent. Many spouses in your situation struggle to prove their non-monetary contributions. What kind of assets are we discussing? I provided Jonathan with the account balances and business valuations I'd researched, watching his eyebrows rise as the numbers accumulated. "This is a substantial estate," he observed. "If you can demonstrate that your contributions were integral to building this wealth, you could be entitled to a significant portion in a divorce settlement. What would you recommend as immediate steps?" Document everything. Create a separate account in your name only and begin establishing financial independence. Make sure you have copies of all important records stored securely outside your shared home. And consider retaining a divorce attorney who specializes in high-asset cases. "I'm also planning to make some large purchases in the coming weeks," I said. "Travel, property, educational investments. Would that complicate a potential divorce proceeding?" Jonathan considered this carefully. "If the purchases can be justified as compensation for your unacknowledged contributions to the marital estate, they could actually strengthen your position, especially if your husband has been making similar expenditures without your knowledge or consent." He has been. "Then strategic spending now could be seen as equalizing rather than wasteful, particularly if you're investing in assets that retain value or in experiences that enhance your earning potential." I left Jonathan's office with a clear understanding of my legal position and a referral to Sarah Martinez, a divorce attorney who had successfully represented several high-profile clients in complex financial cases. My appointment with Sarah was scheduled for the following morning. Rather than going home immediately, I drove to the spa resort where I'd booked a weekend retreat. The spa was located in the mountains about 2 hours from the city, a luxury destination that Marcus had always dismissed as an expensive indulgence. I'd reserved their most exclusive package, 3 days of complete pampering, designed to help guests relax and rejuvenate. "Mrs. Thompson," the concierge greeted me when I arrived. "We're delighted to welcome you. Your suite is ready, and we've arranged the full wellness experience you requested." The suite was stunning, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the mountains and a private balcony with a hot tub. For 3 days, I would have massage therapists, nutrition consultants, meditation instructors, and personal trainers focused entirely on my well-being. As I unpacked my new clothes in the spacious closet, I felt a sense of peace that had been absent from my life for years. For the first time since college, I was making choices based purely on what would make me happy and healthy, without considering how those choices would affect someone else's mood or budget. My phone rang as I was preparing for my first spa treatment. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and I let it go to voicemail. When it rang again immediately, I turned it off entirely. For the next 3 days, I was going to focus exclusively on myself. Marcus and his financial anxieties could wait. The spa experience exceeded every expectation I'd had. Each treatment was designed not just for physical relaxation, but for emotional renewal. During the meditation sessions, I found myself reconnecting with dreams and ambitions I'd set aside so long ago that I'd almost forgotten they existed. In the evenings, I sat on my private balcony with a glass of wine and planned my future. Not our future, but mine. The European trip would give me time to think and create, to remember who I'd been before I'd started defining myself in relation to Marcus's needs. The house in Provence would provide a sanctuary where I could pursue my artistic interests without judgment or interruption. Most importantly, I was beginning to understand that the woman who had apologized for buying a $17 mug was not someone I wanted to be anymore. That woman had been afraid, insecure, and convinced that her needs were less important than maintaining peace in her marriage. The woman planning her future in a luxury spa suite was different. She was confident, decisive, and ready to claim the life she deserved. When I returned home Sunday evening, refreshed and determined, I found Marcus waiting in the living room with an expression of barely controlled frustration. 3 days, he said as soon as I walked through the door. You disappeared for 3 days without telling me where you were going. I went to a spa, I replied calmly, setting down my weekend bag. I needed some time to think. I've been calling you constantly. I was worried something had happened. Something did happen, I said. I realized how much better I feel when I'm not constantly worried about your approval or disapproval. Marcus stood up, his agitation obvious. Sophia, this has gone far enough. You've made your point about the spending restrictions, but we need to find a reasonable solution that works for both of us. I have found a solution that works for me, I said. I'm filing for divorce. The words hung in the air between us, final and irrevocable. Marcus stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. You don't mean that. I absolutely mean it. I have an appointment with a divorce attorney tomorrow morning. I'll be requesting half of all marital assets, including your business interests, as compensation for my contributions to your success. You can't take half my business. I built that from nothing. With my help, I reminded him. My labor, my support, my sacrifices. I postponed my own career for 8 years to help you build your success. Now I'm going to claim my fair share of what we created together. Marcus ran his hand through his hair, his composure finally cracking. How much money have you spent this week? I've been getting notifications from the bank about massive transfers, international wire payments, luxury purchases. You're bleeding the accounts dry. I'm investing in my future, I corrected. The travel, the property, the legal consultation, these are all necessary expenses for someone who's reclaiming her independence after years of financial restriction. This is insane. You're destroying our life together over a coffee mug. This was never about a coffee mug, I said. This is about respect, equality, and honesty. 3 things our marriage has lacked for far too long. I walked toward the stairs, then turned back. I'll be sleeping in the guest room from now on. My attorney will be in touch with you about the divorce proceedings. I suggest you contact your own legal representation. Sophia, please, don't do this. We can work things out. I'll change how we handle money, give you more freedom to spend. You still don't understand, I said sadly. I don't want more freedom to spend your money. I want my own money. I want independence, not increased allowances. What about our marriage? Our future together? Our marriage was a business arrangement, where you were the senior partner, and I was unpaid labor. Our future together was your future, with my support. I'm ready to have my own future now. Marcus seemed to deflate, finally understanding that this conversation was not a negotiation, but an announcement. How long have you been planning this? Since the moment you lectured me about mindful spending while secretly maintaining an expensive apartment, I said. Maybe longer. Maybe since the first time you made me feel guilty for wanting something that didn't serve your goals. I left him standing in the living room and went upstairs to the guest bedroom, where I'd already moved some of my belongings during the week. The room felt like a sanctuary, A space that was entirely mine without any of Marcus's preferences or expectations imposed on it. As I prepared for bed, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. From a woman who apologized for spending $17 to someone who was claiming her independence one expensive decision at a time. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but the recognition of my own worth had been building for years beneath the surface of my compliant exterior. Tomorrow I would meet with the divorce attorney and begin the legal process of disentangling my life from Marcus's. The European trip would become not just a vacation but a journey of rediscovery. The house in Provence would be not just a purchase but a declaration that I was worthy of beauty, creativity, and joy. My phone, which I'd finally turned back on, showed dozens of missed calls and text messages from Marcus. I deleted them all without reading them. The time for discussions and negotiations was over. The woman who had spent 8 years making herself smaller to accommodate someone else's ego was gone. In her place was someone who understood that love should enhance your life, not diminish it, and that true partnership required equality, not hierarchy. As I fell asleep in my own space, surrounded by my own choices, I felt lighter than I had in years. The most expensive week of my life had purchased something money couldn't buy, the recognition of my own value. And that, I realized, had always been priceless. Perfect. I'd helped Marcus set up that business account when he started his consulting firm, and in the rush of handling the paperwork, he'd given me full authorization rights. It was an access level I'd never used, but it was there. I'd like to understand the current balances and recent activity on all accounts, I said. David hesitated slightly. The business account has quite a bit of activity, Mrs. Thompson. Are you sure you want to review all of it? I'm very sure. The printouts he provided confirmed what I'd suspected. The business account held significantly more money than our personal accounts, and the expenses charged to it painted a clear picture of Marcus's lifestyle. The downtown apartment, expensive dinners, luxury purchases, even what appeared to be regular payments to a high-end gym that I'd never heard him mention. Most interesting was the recent deposit pattern. Marcus's consulting firm had landed several major contracts over the past year, bringing in far more revenue than he'd discussed with me. While I'd been agonizing over the cost of household items and postponing personal goals for financial reasons, Marcus had been quietly accumulating wealth in his business account, while maintaining tight control over our personal spending. David, I said, studying the numbers, I'd like to make some transfers and authorize some expenditures today. Of course. What did you have in mind? I smiled, thinking about Marcus's lecture on mindful spending and the careful budget he'd imposed on our household while maintaining his secret luxury lifestyle. I want to show my husband what real spending looks like. Sarah Martinez possessed the kind of sharp intelligence that made expensive hourly rates seem like bargains. Her office overlooked the financial district through floor-to-ceiling windows, and her handshake conveyed both warmth and unwavering determination. Within the first 10 minutes of our meeting, I understood why Jonathan had recommended her so highly. I've reviewed the financial documents you sent over, Sarah said, spreading the papers across her polished conference table. This is one of the most well-documented cases I've seen in terms of spousal contribution to business development. Your record-keeping is exceptional. I learned early in our marriage that details matter, I replied. I just never expected to use them like this. Your husband's attorney will likely argue that your contributions were minimal and that the business success stems entirely from his professional expertise. However, the evidence you've compiled tells a different story entirely. Sarah walked me through the legal strategy she'd developed overnight. The documentation I'd maintained over 8 years painted a clear picture of a wife who had functioned as an unpaid business partner while being treated as a dependent. The financial records showed consistent patterns of Marcus making unilateral decisions about major expenses, while restricting my access to funds I'd helped generate. The secret apartment is particularly damaging to his credibility, Sarah continued. It demonstrates both financial deception and a pattern of maintaining double standards about appropriate spending. Combined with your evidence of other undisclosed expenses, it creates a compelling narrative of financial dishonesty. What can I realistically expect from a settlement? Given the extent of your contributions and the value of the assets involved, I'm confident we can secure at least 40% of the total marital estate. However, I believe we can argue for 50% based on your integral role in building the business. The numbers Sarah outlined represented more money than I'd ever imagined having independent access to. Enough to maintain the European property, fund my creative pursuits, and establish complete financial independence for the rest of my life. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out the folder containing social media photos and business expense records. I discovered that Marcus has been using business funds for personal entertainment, including hosting parties at the apartment. His business partners have no knowledge of these expenditures. Sarah's eyes lit up as she reviewed the evidence. This could be grounds for additional damages if the business partners decide to pursue recovery of misappropriated funds. It also gives us significant leverage in negotiations. We spent 2 hours developing a comprehensive legal strategy that would protect my interests while exposing Marcus's financial misconduct. When I left Sarah's office, I felt armed with both legal expertise and moral certainty that I was pursuing justice rather than revenge. My phone had been buzzing constantly throughout the meeting with calls and texts from Marcus. When I finally checked the messages, they revealed a progression from confusion to anger to what appeared to be panic. Sophia, please call me. We need to discuss this rationally. I spoke with my attorney. You're making a huge mistake that will hurt both of us. The business partners are asking questions about recent expenses. What did you tell people? This is financial blackmail. I won't be manipulated by threats. I'm freezing all business accounts until we can resolve this situation. The final message had arrived just minutes before I left Sarah's office. Marcus had apparently decided that cutting off my access to funds would force me back into compliance. It was exactly the kind of controlling behavior that had driven me to this point in the first place. I called Sarah immediately. He's frozen the business accounts, I told her. Claims he's protecting assets until we can resolve the situation. That's actually perfect, Sarah replied, sounding pleased. Freezing accounts during divorce proceedings without court approval can be seen as financial abuse. It strengthens our case considerably and gives us grounds to request immediate relief from the court. Within hours, Sarah had filed emergency motions requesting that the court restore my access to marital funds and prevent Marcus from hiding or dissipating assets. The legal system moved with surprising speed when financial manipulation was involved. By Wednesday afternoon, Marcus's attempt to control the situation through economic pressure had backfired spectacularly. Not only had the court ordered him to restore my account access, but they'd also appointed a neutral third party to monitor all financial transactions pending the divorce proceedings. The court order arrived at Marcus's office while he was meeting with his business partners about the mysterious expenses I'd been charging to company accounts. According to Sarah, who had contacts throughout the legal community, the meeting had not gone well for Marcus. Apparently, his partners were already concerned about some irregularities they'd noticed. Sarah reported during our Wednesday evening phone call. Your recent purchases prompted them to conduct a more thorough audit of business expenses. They've discovered the apartment payments, the entertainment charges, and several other personal expenses that were charged to the business without proper authorization. What does that mean for him professionally? It means he's facing potential removal from his own firm if he can't repay the misappropriated funds. His partners are treating this as embezzlement rather than poor bookkeeping. The irony was perfect. Marcus's attempt to maintain control over our finances had led to the exposure of his professional misconduct, which would likely cost him far more than any divorce settlement. The man who had lectured me about $17 coffee mugs was now facing career destruction over his own financial improprieties. Thursday morning brought a phone call that changed everything. The real estate agent in France called to inform me that the property purchase had been finalized and I was now the owner of a farmhouse in Provence. The keys would be waiting for me at the local property management office whenever I arrived. Congratulations, Rebecca said warmly. You're now an international property owner. The previous owner left a note saying she's excited that the house will be going to another artist who appreciates creative spaces. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen looking out at the BMW in the driveway and the construction crew that had arrived to begin the office renovation. In less than a week, I'd gone from being a woman who apologized for small purchases to someone who owned property in France and was about to embark on a 6-month European adventure. The transformation felt surreal, but it also felt right in a way that my life with Marcus never had. Friday afternoon brought the confrontation I'd been both dreading and anticipating. Marcus arrived home early from what I assumed was another difficult meeting with his business partners. His appearance shocked me. The confident, perfectly groomed man I'd been married to for 8 years looked haggard and defeated. "We need to talk," he said, standing in the doorway of the kitchen where I was reviewing travel documents. "I'm listening." Marcus sat down heavily across from me, the same position where he'd criticized my mug purchase what felt like years ago. "My partners are demanding that I repay almost $200,000 in personal expenses that were charged to the business. If I can't come up with the money immediately, they're going to buy out my shares and remove me from the firm." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and realized I meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want to see Marcus destroy himself. "I need your help, Sophia. If you withdraw the divorce petition and we can present a united front, I might be able to convince them that this was a misunderstanding about expense categories." "A misunderstanding?" "Poor bookkeeping rather than intentional misappropriation. If you confirm that you approved the apartment as a business expense for client entertainment, it might be enough to satisfy them." I stared at Marcus, amazed that even facing professional ruin, he was still trying to manipulate me into solving his problems. "You want me to lie to your business partners to cover up your financial misconduct. I want you to help me save our marriage and our future together." "We don't have a future together, Marcus. You made that clear when you told me my contributions were replaceable by an assistant." Marcus leaned forward desperately. "I was angry when I said that. I didn't mean it. You're essential to everything I've built. I need you. You need me to clean up the mess you made by lying and stealing from your own business partners." "It wasn't stealing. It was poor documentation of legitimate business expenses." "Marcus, I've seen the photos from your parties at the apartment. I know exactly what kind of business you were conducting there." The color drained from his face as he realized how much I actually knew about his activities. "You've been spying on me." "I've been paying attention. Something I should have done years ago." Marcus stood up and began pacing, his desperation becoming more obvious with each step. "Fine, you want honesty? I'll give you honesty. Yes, I used the apartment for personal entertainment. Yes, I charged some personal expenses to the business. But every successful professional does that. It's how business development works in the real world." "By stealing from your partners?" "By being strategic about expense allocation. The parties at the apartment did generate business contacts and referrals. The personal expenses were investments in my professional image. And the restriction on my spending, while you were making these strategic investments?" Marcus stopped pacing and looked at me directly. "I was protecting our financial security. Your purchases didn't contribute to our income generation." "There it is," I said quietly. "The real truth. You believe that only your spending matters, because only your income matters. My contributions, my sacrifices, my support, none of that has monetary value in your calculation." "That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. And it's exactly why we're getting divorced." Marcus sat back down, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "What will it take for you to help me with this situation?" "Nothing," I replied. "There's nothing you can offer me that would make me willing to lie for you or compromise my integrity to preserve your professional reputation. I'll give you whatever you want in the divorce settlement. You'll give me what I'm legally entitled to regardless. The difference is that I'll earn it honestly rather than through deception. The apartment, the spending, all of it was wrong. I admit that, but destroying my career won't fix our marriage." "I'm not destroying your career, Marcus. You did that yourself. Just like you destroyed our marriage through years of financial manipulation and dishonesty." Marcus stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the exact instant when he realized that his attempts at manipulation were futile. "You've changed," he said finally. "Yes, I have. I've remembered who I was before I started defining myself through your expectations. I don't recognize this version of you." "Good," I replied, "because the version you recognized was slowly disappearing under the weight of your control and criticism." This version is healthier. Marcus left the house that evening without another word. I spent the weekend finalizing travel arrangements and packing for my European adventure, which would begin the following Wednesday. The construction crew had nearly completed the office renovation, transforming Marcus's workspace into something that belonged in a luxury hotel rather than a suburban home. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd spent nearly $1 million creating a perfect office for a man who might not have a business to conduct from it much longer. Monday brought news that Marcus's business partners had indeed voted to remove him from the firm. According to Sarah, who had heard details through the legal community, Marcus's attempts to explain away the misappropriated expenses had only made the situation worse. His partners had discovered additional irregularities dating back 2 years, suggesting a pattern of deception rather than isolated incidents. He's essentially been fired from his own company, Sarah explained during our final meeting before my departure. His shares will be bought out at fair market value, but he'll need to find new employment or start over with a new practice. What does that mean for our divorce settlement? It actually improves our position, since his primary asset was his ownership stake in the firm, and that's being liquidated. The funds will be easier to divide equitably. You should receive your settlement much sooner than we originally anticipated. How much sooner? Based on the firm's valuation and your documented contributions, you're looking at approximately $1.8 million within the next 60 days. The number was staggering. More than enough to maintain my European lifestyle indefinitely, pursue any creative projects that interested me, and never again worry about justifying my purchases to anyone. Tuesday evening, my last night in the house that had been my home for 8 years, Marcus returned to collect some personal belongings. I was sitting in the living room with my packed luggage, preparing for my early morning flight to Paris. "So you're really leaving," he said, surveying the suitcases. "I am." "For how long?" "As long as it takes." Marcus sat down on the sofa across from me, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "I know I handled things badly, Sophia. The spending restrictions, the apartment, the way I talked to you about money. I was wrong about all of it." "Yes, you were. Is there any chance we could try again? Start over with complete honesty and equal partnership?" I considered his question seriously. The man sitting across from me looked genuinely remorseful, and part of me felt sympathy for how completely his world had collapsed in just 2 weeks. "The problem isn't just what you did, Marcus. It's who you revealed yourself to be when you thought you had complete control. You showed me that you see marriage as a hierarchy, with you at the top. That's not something that can be fixed with better communication or changed financial arrangements. People can change. Some people can. But change requires recognizing that your fundamental worldview was wrong, not just that your tactics were ineffective. Do you honestly believe that my contributions to your success were equal to yours?" Marcus hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "I think your contributions were valuable," he said carefully. "That's not what I asked. Do you believe they were equal?" The longer pause that followed confirmed what I'd suspected. Even facing the complete destruction of his professional life, Marcus still couldn't acknowledge that my 8 years of support had created equal claim to the wealth we'd generated together. "I built the business," he said finally. "I took the risks, cultivated the clients, developed the expertise. Your support was crucial, but it wasn't the same as what I contributed." "Thank you for being honest," I said. "That's exactly why we could never make this work." "So that's it? 8 years of marriage thrown away because we disagree about financial contributions?" 8 years of marriage ended because one of us never saw it as a real partnership, I corrected. The financial disagreement was just the symptom. Marcus left shortly after that conversation, taking only a single suitcase of personal items. The next morning, I climbed into my BMW and drove to the airport, leaving behind the house, the marriage, and the version of myself that had spent 8 years making herself smaller to accommodate someone else's ego. The flight to Paris was everything I dreamed it would be. First-class accommodations, exceptional service, and the intoxicating sense of freedom that came from traveling toward a new life rather than away from an old one. As the plane lifted off, I felt physically lighter, as if I'd been carrying invisible weight for years without realizing it. Paris exceeded every expectation I'd harbored during 8 years of dreaming about European travel. The apartment I'd rented was located in the 6th arrondissement, with tall windows that overlooked a tree-lined street and were close enough to the Seine that I could walk to the river each morning with my coffee. The first week was dedicated to pure indulgence. I visited museums I'd been reading about for years, ate at restaurants that appeared in travel magazines, and shopped for clothes that reflected my personal style rather than someone else's preferences. Each day brought small revelations about who I was when freed from the constraints of maintaining someone else's approval. The art lessons I'd arranged began during my second week, taught by a local painter named Celeste, who worked from a studio filled with natural light and creative chaos. Under her patient instruction, I rediscovered the joy of creating something beautiful, simply because it brought me pleasure. "You have good instincts," Celeste observed as I worked on a landscape inspired by my morning walks along the Seine. "But you're holding back. Being too careful. Art requires permission to make mistakes, to take risks." Her words applied to more than painting. For 8 years, I'd been careful about everything, calculating each decision based on how it might affect Marcus's mood or our carefully controlled budget. Learning to take creative risks on canvas translated into taking emotional risks in the rest of my life. By my third week in Paris, I was ready to visit my new property in Provence. The train journey south was spectacular, with countryside views that shifted from urban sophistication to rural charm as we traveled deeper into wine country. When I finally arrived at the small town nearest my farmhouse, I felt like I was coming home to a place I'd never been. The property manager, a cheerful woman named Marie who spoke excellent English, drove me to the farmhouse through winding roads lined with vineyards and lavender fields. When we rounded the final curve and I saw my house for the first time, I actually gasped. The photos hadn't captured the magic of the setting. Stone walls weathered to a warm honey color, a red tile roof that seemed to glow in the afternoon sunlight, and gardens that cascaded down the hillside in informal profusion. The artist's studio was a separate building connected to the main house by a covered walkway, with north-facing windows that would provide perfect light for painting. The previous owner, she was very sad to leave, Marie explained as she showed me through the rooms. But she said she wanted the house to go to another artist who would appreciate what she had created here. Each room had been furnished with obvious love and attention to detail. Nothing matched in the conventional sense, but everything worked together to create spaces that were both beautiful and comfortable. The kitchen was centered around a massive stone fireplace with a wood-burning oven, perfect for the cooking classes I'd planned to take in nearby towns. The master bedroom opened onto a private terrace with views across the valley, and I could already imagine mornings spent drinking coffee while watching the sunrise over the vineyards. The guest bedrooms were charming and individual, ready to accommodate friends who might visit from America. But it was the studio that truly captured my heart. Easels positioned to take advantage of the natural light, storage for art supplies, and a small seating area where I could relax between painting sessions. The previous owner had left several canvases depicting local landscapes, and I could see myself continuing that tradition while developing my own artistic voice. "I'll take excellent care of it," I promised Marie as we completed the property tour. "I can see that you will," she replied. "The house chooses its owners, I think. You and this place, you are meant to be together." I spent a month in Provence, dividing my time between settling into the house and exploring the surrounding countryside. The cooking classes I had arranged were held in a nearby village, where I learned to prepare traditional dishes using herbs from my own garden. The local market became a weekly destination, where I practiced my French while selecting ingredients for experiments in my new kitchen. Most importantly, I began painting seriously for the first time since college. The studio became my sanctuary, where I could lose hours working on landscapes that captured the changing light across the valley. My technique was rusty after years of neglect, but the joy of creating had returned immediately. The phone calls from Sarah provided regular updates on the divorce proceedings, which were progressing exactly as she'd predicted. Marcus's attempts to contest the settlement had failed when his own attorney advised him that fighting my claims would likely result in even higher awards once his financial misconduct was fully exposed in court. "He's agreed to the 50-50 split of all marital assets," Sarah reported during one of our weekly calls. The final papers should be ready for signing within the next 2 weeks. What about his business situation? His former partners bought out his shares for fair market value, but he's struggling to find new employment. Apparently, word has spread through the legal community about the misappropriated expenses. Most firms are reluctant to take on someone with questionable financial ethics. I felt a pang of sympathy for Marcus, despite everything. His professional reputation had been built over years of careful cultivation, and its destruction was probably more devastating to him than the divorce itself. Has he found another position? He's started a solo practice working out of a shared office space, significantly reduced circumstances compared to what he had before, but he's still practicing law. I'm glad he's found something. You're more generous than I would be in your situation, Sarah observed. I'm not generous, I replied, looking out at the vineyard views from my terrace. I'm happy. It's much easier to feel sympathy for someone when you're completely satisfied with your own life. The final divorce papers arrived by international courier on a Tuesday morning in late summer. I signed them sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee, surrounded by the sounds of birds in the garden and the distant church bells from the village. The signature that legally ended my marriage felt like the final step in a transformation that had begun with a $17 coffee mug. Within days, the settlement funds were transferred to my new international accounts. Nearly $2 million that represented not just financial security, but validation of my contributions to wealth I'd helped create. The money would allow me to maintain my European lifestyle indefinitely, but more importantly, it represented freedom from ever again having to justify my choices to someone who didn't value my contributions. That evening, I called my sister in California, the first family member I'd spoken to since leaving for Europe. Sophia, Janet exclaimed when she heard my voice. I've been wondering how you were doing. Marcus called me a few weeks ago asking if I'd heard from you. He sounded pretty desperate. The divorce was finalized today, I said. I'm officially a free woman. How do you feel about that? Relieved. Happy. Excited about the future. And Marcus? We'll be fine, I think. He's starting over professionally, but he's still young enough to rebuild his career if he's learned anything from this experience. I told Janet about the house, the art lessons, the cooking classes, and the plans I was developing for a creative life in France. Her excitement for my new adventures reminded me how much I'd missed having relationships that weren't filtered through Marcus's expectations. You sound different, Janet observed. More like yourself, if that makes sense. It makes perfect sense, I replied. I feel like myself for the first time in years. Fall in Provence was even more beautiful than summer had been. The vineyards turned brilliant colors, the markets filled with seasonal produce, and the light took on the golden quality that had attracted artists to the region for generations. My own painting was improving rapidly under Celeste's continued instruction via video calls, and I'd begun planning my first exhibition for the following spring. The guest bedrooms were finally put to use when Janet and her family visited in October. Watching my teenage nieces explore the countryside and practice their high school French with local vendors filled the house with laughter and energy that had been missing during my solitary months of recovery. Aunt Sophia, this place is like a fairy tale, my niece Emma said as we prepared dinner together using vegetables from the garden. Are you going to live here forever? Maybe, I replied, realizing that forever was no longer a frightening concept when it referred to a life I'd chosen rather than one I'd accepted by default. Janet and I talked late into the evenings during their visit, catching up on 8 years of conversations that had been constrained by my marriage dynamics. She admitted that she'd never liked Marcus but had kept her opinions to herself rather than risk damaging our relationship. He was always so controlling about your time and money, she said as we shared wine on the terrace one evening. Remember how he used to complain when you spent money on gifts for family members? Or how he'd get irritated if our phone calls went on too long? I remember, I said. I thought it was normal. I thought marriage meant compromise and putting your spouse's needs first. Some compromise is normal. Making yourself disappear isn't. Her words crystallized something I'd been feeling but hadn't articulated. The woman who had apologized for buying a $17 mug hadn't been compromising in her marriage. She'd been disappearing. Each concession had made her smaller, until there was barely anything left of her original personality. The woman sitting on a terrace in Provence with her sister, drinking wine and planning art exhibitions, was who I'd always been underneath the layers of accommodation and self-denial. Winter in the countryside was quieter but no less beautiful. I settled into routines that felt natural and sustainable. Morning coffee on the terrace when weather permitted, painting in the studio during the best light hours, afternoon walks through the vineyards, and evenings spent reading or working on the memoir I'd begun writing about my transformation. The book was initially intended as a personal exercise in understanding how I'd lost myself so completely and found my way back. But as I wrote, I realized the story might resonate with other women who were struggling with similar dynamics in their own relationships. Many of us learn to make ourselves smaller, I wrote in one chapter. We're taught that good wives are accommodating, that love means sacrifice, that partnership requires one person to lead and the other to follow. But real partnership means both people get to take up space, both people get to want things, both people get to make decisions about their shared future. Spring brought the art exhibition I'd been preparing for months. The local gallery in the nearest town had agreed to display my paintings depicting the seasonal changes in the countryside. The opening reception was attended by locals, other expatriate artists, and several collectors who'd traveled from Paris specifically for the show. 3 paintings sold that evening, including the landscape I'd been working on during my first week in the studio. The validation of strangers appreciating my work enough to purchase it was profoundly satisfying, in a way that had nothing to do with the money and everything to do with recognition of my creative voice. "You found your style very quickly," observed Philippe, a gallery owner from Lyon who'd driven down for the opening. "There's something authentic in these landscapes that speaks to real emotional connection with the place." "I think this place has been waiting for me my entire life," I replied, looking around at the walls lined with my work. "I just had to become brave enough to come find it." The memoir was published the following autumn by a small but respected press that specialized in women's stories. The advance wasn't large, but seeing my name on a book cover represented validation of a different kind. The story of my financial revenge and personal transformation resonated with readers who reached out to share their own experiences of reclaiming their lives from controlling relationships. Book readings took me back to the United States for the first time since leaving, and I was surprised to discover that America felt foreign after 18 months in France. The pace was faster, the conversations more superficial, and I found myself missing the deeper rhythms of my European life. During one reading in San Francisco, a woman in her 40s approached me afterward with tears in her eyes. "I've been making myself smaller for 15 years, she said. "Your book made me realize that I don't have to keep doing that." "What will you do differently?" I asked. "I'm going to start spending money on art classes," she said with a determination that reminded me of myself discovering the travel agency. "My husband always says they're a waste of money, but I've wanted to paint since I was a child." "Art classes are never a waste of money," I assured her. "They're an investment in remembering who you are." Similar conversations happened at every reading, with women who recognized themselves in my story of gradual self-diminishment and sudden awakening. The book tour became less about promoting sales and more about encouraging other women to value their own contributions and demand equal partnership in their relationships. When I returned to Provence after the tour, the house felt like coming home to myself. The studio was filled with autumn light, the garden was heavy with late-season fruit, and the routines that had become second nature over 2 years abroad welcomed me back with comfort and familiarity. A letter was waiting from Sarah, updating me on Marcus's situation. His solo practice was slowly growing, and he'd apparently entered therapy to address what Sarah diplomatically described as, quote, his control issues in relationships. He'd also begun dating someone new, a fellow attorney who Sarah assured me seemed well-equipped to maintain her own independence. "I think he learned something from losing you," Sarah wrote. "Whether he learned enough to build a healthier relationship remains to be seen, but he seems to understand that his previous approach to marriage was unsustainable." I hoped that was true, both for Marcus's sake and for the sake of any woman who might share his future. The destruction of our marriage had been painful but necessary, and if it led him to develop more respectful relationship patterns, then something positive had emerged from the wreckage. 3 years after signing the divorce papers, I was planning my first solo exhibition in Paris. The paintings had evolved from simple landscapes into more complex works that explored themes of transformation, independence, and the courage required to claim your own life. The gallery that would host the show was prestigious enough to attract serious collectors and art critics. Standing in my studio, surrounded by canvases that represented 3 years of artistic growth and personal development, I thought about the woman who had once apologized for buying a $17 coffee mug. That woman felt like a character from someone else's story now, a person I'd once known but could barely relate to anymore. The woman I'd become understood that love should enhance your life rather than diminish it, that real partnership required equality rather than hierarchy, and that financial independence was essential for emotional independence. Most importantly, she understood that her own desires and dreams were as valid and important as anyone else's. The phone rang as I was preparing to leave for my morning walk through the vineyards. Janet's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with the enthusiasm that came from relationships built on mutual respect rather than accommodation. "Guess what?" she said without preamble. "Emma got into art school, and she says it's because you inspired her to take her creativity seriously." "That's wonderful news," I replied, genuinely delighted. "Will she study in Europe?" "Actually, she's hoping to spend a semester in France. She was wondering if her favorite aunt might have room for a houseguest who's eager to learn about painting and independence." I looked around at my beautiful house with its guest bedrooms and artist studio, at the life I'd built from the ashes of a marriage that had nearly erased me, and felt the deep satisfaction that came from being able to offer someone else the support and encouragement I'd once desperately needed. "Tell Emma she's always welcome here," I said. "I'll teach her everything I know about both painting and the courage required to live the life you actually want, instead of the life someone else chooses for you." After hanging up, I walked through my house, appreciating anew what I'd created. Every room reflected my personal taste. Every purchase had been made without justification or apology, and every decision about how to spend my time and money was mine alone to make. The $17 coffee mug that had triggered my awakening sat on my kitchen counter, a daily reminder of how far I'd traveled from the woman who had once felt guilty about such a small indulgence. Next to it sat a handmade ceramic piece I'd purchased from a local artisan, beautiful and expensive, and chosen simply because it brought me joy every time I looked at it. 3 years later, I understood that the real revenge had never been about the money I'd spent in those dramatic weeks of financial rebellion. The real revenge was building a life so satisfying and authentic that my former marriage felt like a bad dream I'd awakened from, rather than a loss I was still grieving. The woman who had shown Marcus what real spending looked like had ultimately shown herself what real living looked like. And that transformation, I realized as I stepped out into the Provence sunshine, with my coffee and my complete freedom to choose how to spend my day, was absolutely priceless. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.